All right, so we're working in RLA reading today, and you should have this lesson available for you. And we're looking at transitional words and phrases. Why are those important? So transitional words, they give a couple examples here, indicate a structural relationship. And a lot of times you can kind of think of it as when a writer is shifting gears and sort of changing ideas, and they're letting the reader know through some transitional language, whether it's just a simple word like consequently, nevertheless, or maybe a phrase. So it's helpful to the reader because it's one of those sort of signal words or a signal phrase to let you know that there's something that's about to change, or they are want to emphasize a point. That's another way that'll come up, or they are adding a point. One thing I also know about why this is important. Not only again is this something that will appear on your test. They may ask you a question about locating a transitional phrase or adding a transitional phrase or word, something like that. It's my understanding that in your writing, in the writing portion of the test, they like to see you use transitional phrases. So transitional phrases, not only are indicating, some sort of shift or an emphasis, it also helps with the flow, right? So it's not suddenly you're, moving into a completely new area. It allows the readers to sort of, just like the phrase says, it's helping the reader transition to your new idea, your new thought, particularly when it's in contrast, right? When there's like a strong contrast between things, or they want to emphasize something, or what they're adding to their information is really important. So we'll see how that works in our lesson.
Oh, hi! This is the lesson on transitional words and phrases. Writers use transitions to move from one idea to the next. In this lesson, you'll learn how transitions affect meaning, emphasis, and purpose.
So it's my last lesson, right? Last day of my classes. And I had to have Dwayne here to say goodbye. I mentioned the other day that we haven't heard from Dwayne in a while. And of course, here he is to see me off the last lesson. He knew I just couldn't leave without him.
I'm going to tell you all about transitions. See, I started thinking about transitions after I read this article about the minimum wage. It had me totally confused. It seemed like first the writer was saying one thing, and then the writer was saying something completely different. What's that all about? Really? I just completely misunderstood. When I paid attention to the transitions, I could see where the writer was moving from one idea to a different one, and how those ideas were related. That's the point of transitions. When you read, there's not just one idea. There are lots of them. The writer might add more information, point out relationships between ideas, or even say something that totally contrasts what they said before. If you pay attention to transitions, you can understand better how those ideas fit together and what the writer is really saying. Here, let me show you.
Yeah, I mean, he says it perfectly, right? That's just what I said. It shows contrast. It adds more information, or it points out a relationship, right? So, and the writer is really wanting you to sort of see that transition. So that's why they put it in there. All right, so let's see what we have here.
The first thing you want to pay attention to is the meaning that transitions add. A transition can be a word, or a phrase, or even a whole sentence or more that links two ideas. In the resources, there are a lot of examples of transitions. There are so many transitions with so many different meanings. A word like additionally or furthermore tells you that the writer's going to give you more information. Actually, or in fact, tells you that the writer's going to expand or clarify, probably with something surprising. Alternatively, or otherwise, shows that there's an option. For example, or especially, introduces an example or a special case. Similarly, shows that something is similar. However, shows that you're going to say something that contrasts. Oh, and you can show cause and effect by saying something like because or as a result. Another important kind of transition shows the order or sequence, like you might say first or second or next or then. I could list transitions forever. There's so many. The important thing is to look at how ideas are connected. What words does the writer use to show the connections? And how does that affect the meaning? Look at these sentences. A 2013 meta-study reviewed 64 studies that found that the minimum wage did not affect employment. Many argue that minimum wage increases will destroy jobs. Whoa! Why would people say minimum wage increases destroy jobs if this study says it didn't? These sentences don't go together. But look, if I add a transition like nevertheless, now that makes more sense. It means despite. The writer realizes that the ideas contrast with each other and wants to point that out. Once I understand the transition, I understand what the writer means.
Yeah, it really, again, it helps that flow of ideas, and helps the reader to see changes in thought when contrast is added or more information. It makes it a lot easier to digest.
Take a look at that article I was telling you about. How does the transition in the highlighted sentence affect the meaning?
All right, let's see here. Do we need to read the whole thing? Probably not. I'll read the first paragraph and the second paragraph. So, 2013 meta study reviewed 64 studies and found that the minimum wage did not affect employment. Nevertheless, many argue that minimum wage increases will destroy jobs. A survey by the Congressional Budget Office estimated that a minimum wage increase. Many argue that minimum wage increases will destroy jobs. A survey by the Congressional Budget Office estimated that a minimum wage increase of around $3 per hour would mean 500,000 jobs lost. So, what is the truth about minimum wage increases? Are they a good idea? All right, this is what we want to pay attention to. The arguments against minimum wage increases don't stop with potential job losses. While the goal of minimum wage increases is to fight poverty, opponents argue the opposite. They state that low wage jobs would be lost and hours would be reduced because of the effects on low wage jobs. The poor would be harmed. Okay, so we're looking at while the goal of minimum wage increases is to fight poverty, opponents argue the opposite. So that's basically a whole sentence that's a transition. So how does the transition in the highlighted sentence from the passage affect the meaning? So it shows contrast, right? From the earlier statements, the arguments against minimum wage increases don't stop with potential job losses. While the goal of minimum wage increases is to fight poverty, opponents argue the opposite. They state, right? So it transitions from one idea to the other, contrasting between the idea of increases, minimum wage increases cause potential job loss. It's also saying that low wage jobs would be lost and hours would be reduced. There you go. So there's transition between the two, and with contrast. That's how it's transitioned.
Great job! This sentence uses the word while to show the relationship between a goal of the minimum wage and an argument of opponents. The transition shows contrast.
Yes. Right. So while minimum wage is supposed to help the impoverished, comma, and then it goes on to the contrasted statement.
Now, one thing transitions do is change the emphasis. They point out what's important to the writer. Take a look at these sentences again. Because of the way it's stated, with the transition, what's the emphasis? Well, you could say that there's an emphasis on contrast between a big study and arguments against minimum wage increases. But it's more than that. Imagine if it was put in a different order with another transition. However, seems to show a stronger contrast, and the order makes a difference. Before, the writer was showing that people are against the minimum wage in spite of that study. Now the writer seems to say that the study proves opponents of the minimum wage are wrong. The meanings are similar, but not quite the same. There's a change in emphasis. If you pay attention to transitions, you can see what the writer emphasizes. That tells you more about what the writer thinks.
All right. Okay, let's keep going here.
Okay, in the highlighted paragraph, which transition shows the writer's emphasis the most?
Okay, showing emphasis. What is the writer emphasizing here? So in our highlighted passage, overall, which argument is stronger? Both have some evidence on their side, so each position must be examined carefully. Most critically, both positions make contrasting economic arguments. In order to decide which economic arguments are true, objective scientific studies are needed. So, most critically, right? That is showing you what he's about to emphasize. Most critically, somebody starting a sentence with that, starting an idea with that, they're straight up telling you, what is most important. They can also say most importantly or something like that. That's transition.
Great job. The transition most critically points out an idea that the writer thinks is most important. It emphasizes the contrast in the economic arguments.
Yeah. Right.
Another thing to look at with transitions is the writer's purpose. Understanding purpose is really important when you read. So how does the word nevertheless fit with the writer's purpose? The first thing I got to know is, what is the writer's purpose? Is it arguing that minimum wage increases are good or bad? No, not really. Is it comparing the two arguments? Well, that's more like it. The writer is explaining and comparing two sides of the argument. And look, the transition is doing exactly that. It's showing the contrast between the argument for minimum wage and the argument against it. So a transition like this one can give you a clue to the writer's purpose, and it can strengthen the writer's purpose.
Right. Okay. So those were short and sweet. All right. Let's see here.
Take a look at the highlighted sentence in the passage. How does the transition support the author's purpose?
Right. So let's take a look here. Highlighted sentence. We'll read around it. So overall, which argument is stronger? So the same thing. Both have some evidence on their side, so each position must be examined carefully. Most critically, both positions make contrasting economic arguments. In order to decide which economic arguments are true, objective scientific studies are needed. So it shows the author's main conclusion for comparing the argument, right? That is it's really in that last paragraph, right? The central idea, right? So when he puts that transition at the beginning, it really focuses everything, towards that, right? That's sort of your center of gravity for that paragraph. So it shows the author's main conclusion from the comparison.
Great job. The transition most critically emphasizes the writer's main conclusion from comparing the arguments for and against raising the minimum wage.
All right. And we have our usual.
Cool. Nice job working on those exercises. Are you ready to do some practice?
All right. So let's take about 10. Well, you know what? Actually, before we do that, I want to look at some of these transitional words and phrases. As you said, it's probably a big list here. Number 3, note of that last one was shows the author's main conclusion from comparing the arguments. So yeah, this list is kind of broken into various purposes of using a transition. So we'll just hit up maybe one or two from each one, right? Adding detail, more information. So additionally, also, right? You've heard these before. Furthermore, in addition to, moreover, those, right? You're getting ready to have more information given to you, adding detail to those things. Clarifying, expanding, right? Sometimes with surprising information. Actually, in fact, indeed. Indeed just means in fact, right? And you would start a sentence, indeed, comma. If you're starting a sentence with a transitional word or phrase, typically you're going to have a comma right after that. In other words, right, what I mean is, I wouldn't use that one. That one's not very good. I would rather say, to clarify or something like that. Giving options, alternatively, either, optionally, right, otherwise. Examples, for instance, for example, I would use ones like that. Specific important case, naming an example, especially, particularly, specifically, right? That's really directing the reader that this is really important. Or more generally, by and large, in general, right? If it's encompassing a large idea, expanding an idea, as for something, concerning this, considering this. Again, that's kind of related to clarifying when you're expanding the idea. Similarities, right? Equally, likewise, similarly. Differences, you see these a lot. Contrast is one of the most commonly used transitions, but yet, right? However, in contrast, strangely, whereas, while usually starts, that's going to be a whole phrase, while this happens here, comma, this happens differently over here. So, although, no, though, at the end of a sentence. That one's style wise isn't the greatest when you end it with the transition. Importance, right? Above all, critically, first and foremost, most critically, stuff like that. Although, despite, similar to contrast, even though, although, nevertheless. So very close to contrast, but maybe a softer way of stating things. Replacing, rather, instead. Purpose, for fear that, in hope that, in order to, right? So why are we doing something? Cause and reason, because, for, due to, effect and consequences, accordingly, hence, for this reason. In a circumstance, given that, in the case of, on the condition that, those you see a lot in legal documents and things like that, right? If you were, signing some type of contract or something like that, in the circumstances of, you would see, blah, blah, blah happen. So, value, unfortunately, fortunate, definitely, absolutely, certainly. Frequency, sequencing, that's one that you see quite often, right? If you're, this is something you might want to use when you're, in your writing response, if you're listing ideas and things like that, or evidence, first, second, third, or, lastly, firstly, all of that. So that helps the reader, see the transition in your ideas. Continuation, transitions in time, immediately, soon, sooner or later, frequency of something happening. Endings and conclusions. That's also something that you might want to use, for your conclusion in your paragraph. In conclusion, I state that, or to conclude. That's, really indicate to the reader that you're wrapping up. Summary, related to conclusion. but just summarizing information, not necessarily giving a final thought on it. Restating something, you know, the thing about that, we talk about redundancy and stuff like that. So those are going to be used less frequently. Digressing to a different idea, by the way, incidentally, when you're really shifting gears or resuming a prior idea, anyhow, anyway. So after you've digressed to a different idea and you return to it, you would say anyhow, or anyway, or to resume. So, the more common ones here, obviously, are things like adding detail, adding emphasis, clarifying, making a specific case, and contrast, and despite, or although. Those you see the most common, and I will post that list on Google Classroom later. Anywho, let's go ahead. Anyhow, after I've digressed here and we're transitioning, let's take about 10 minutes to work through these practice questions, and then we'll come back and review here. Go ahead and take about 10 minutes, almost 1 or 2 to 2:25. Yeah, Debbie, if you ever need to leave or anything, the lesson's always there for you guys. You can finish it later. And I always, everything's on Google Classroom. So if you want to, review the lesson or anything, it's on Google Classroom for you guys. So yeah, if you need to pick up your daughter or anything like that, we all know things happen. So you can go ahead and do what you got to do. let's go ahead and give this a go. Here we go. So here, transition in the highlighted sentence show. Won't get through the whole passage here. We'll kind of read, the paragraph to give us context. The concept of property rights is a major idea in economics. Property rights is the idea that whoever owns a resource or item can say how it is used. An individual person, a group, a company, or government can own a resource or item. Property rights are important in a capitalist economy. However, they are not unlimited. What kinds of property rights should individuals and companies have? More importantly, what are the limits of property rights? The following two issues involve property rights. Okay, so you have that one of those transitional words right there. Property rights are important in a capitalist economy. However, they are not unlimited. And it's separating two independent clauses. How do we know this? Because you use a semicolon, word however, and then comma. So we know that's two independent clauses there. Anyway, so what does the transition of the highlighted sentence show? It's showing the limits of property rights contrast with their importance. Right? So yes, property rights in a capitalist society, extremely important. However, nevertheless, but yet, whatever you want to throw in there, there are limits to that. So submit there. Yeah, showing that switching gears, right? Throwing in a new idea here, and it's one of contrast. What does the highlighted transitional phrase emphasize? Here, so property rights are important in a capitalist economy. However, they are not unlimited. What kinds of property rights should individuals and companies have? More importantly, comma, what are the limits of property rights? So here, the limits of property rights are important to understand, right? So yes, property rights are important. More importantly, understanding those rights. Yeah, transitional phrase introduces the question of limits on property rights. It emphasizes that question by pointing out that it is important. Okay, the first one, Jessica, was the limits of property rights contrast with their importance. Right, limits of property rights contrast with their importance. Two here is the limits of property rights are important to understand. Number three, so what is one way the highlighted transitional phrase supports the author's purpose? So short paragraph here, a farmer depends on property rights. The most critical example is that the owner of a farm has a right to use that land to grow crops or raise cattle. The care and use of the farm is a property right. So here, it emphasizes how central property rights are. Emphasizes how central, meaning how important they are. Yeah, introducing the example as the most critical, right? That's showing you that it is the most important.
Good job. You got 3.
All right, Joy. All right, so how does the highlighted transitional sentence add to the meaning? So a whole transitional sentence. So here, so we'll read the first part, right? Because we have to understand the transition. That's why I'm not reading the whole things, but you need to read enough above and below it to get the context to understand what's transitioning. So a farmer depends on property rights. The most critical example is that the owner of a farm has a right to use that land to grow crops or raise cattle. The care and use of the farm is a property right. Farmers also own their equipment and machines. So that's supposed to be a transitional sentence. Farmers also own their equipment and machines. Yet, recent issues regarding tractors have brought that ownership and its property rights into question. Modern tractors use computer code to run. Tractor companies don't want their code worked with or changed by other people. Therefore, tractor companies think of a tractor as more like licensed software than a car or lawnmower. Okay, so this one introduces a new topic as part of property rights. So still the main idea is property rights, but we're introducing a new facet to that, right? So introduces a new topic as part of property rights. So down here, C. And that's also, right, a topic sentence. It was right there at the beginning of our paragraph, right, where we usually introduce a new topic to a paragraph, right? Every paragraph sort of has its own topic. Okay, and so what does the transition in the highlighted sentence emphasize? So farmers also own their own equipment, right? So we said that. Yet, transitional word, recent issues regarding tractors have brought that ownership and its property rights into question. Here, the contrast between assumed ownership and the new issues, right? So, okay, you believe you own your tractor because you bought it, yet we have some issues regarding that. So that statement there is showing some contrast between the two. Okay. Okay, so one limit on property rights is the right of a government to buy or take land for the public good. This is an idea called eminent domain. When and how should governments use eminent domain? Significantly, addressing this question means weighing property rights against the good generated by the government. Consider these examples when the U.S. government built interstate freeways. It used eminent domain to buy land. Was that worthwhile? Okay. So significantly, so here that supports the importance of thinking about limits on property rights, right? Significantly, right? If I see that, I'm going to think, okay, this is pretty important. So it supports the importance of thinking about limits on property rights. Okay, what is the best replacement for the transition word therefore in the highlighted sentence? All right, so reading just above here, yet recent issues regarding tractors have brought the ownership and its property rights into question. Modern tractors use computer code to run. Tractor companies don't want their code worked with or changed by other people. Therefore, tractor companies think of a tractor as more like licensed software than a car or lawnmower. So what could we replace therefore with? So here, for this reason, right? So looking at that again, right? Tractor companies don't want their code worked with or changed by other people. So for this reason, tractor companies think of a tractor as more like licensed software. Okay. For this reason, and one more to go here. Okay, so highlight transitional sentence, emphasize. So significantly, addressing this question means weighing property rights against the good generated by the government. Consider these examples. When the U.S. government built interstate freeways, it used eminent domain to buy land. So there's a transitional sentence, consider these examples. And here, that is important to think about the examples, right? It is saying, consider these examples, right? A whole sentence transitioning to, now I'm going to point some stuff out that's really important for you to think about. All right.
So, did you learn a little bit about transitions? It took me some time to get the hang of transitions, but if I can do it, you can too. Once you start paying attention to what transitions mean and how the writer is using them, you can understand what the writer's saying a lot better. Click results, and I'll show you how you did on the questions.
Okay. So yeah, the thing about transitions, the writer is really wanting to point out what's coming next, right? Either because it's contrasting what they said, it's emphasizing what they said, adding to it, or a number of other things. But they're helping you out, making their writing flow better, and by giving you this help. So, any questions on transitions? I will put up that list as well as an example, so you guys will have that. You'll start seeing as you're writing. It's like, well, this sentence or this paragraph all works together, but there's something needed, right? Maybe I need to have a transition in there. And like I said, in your writing response, the graders like to see, transitional statements. It might be a whole topic sentence, or it might just be one word. There's plenty of room in between there. So yeah, it's certainly one of those more advanced ideas that helps us both understand somebody's writing and makes our writing better. So no questions. That's it, guys. I'm done. It's been a pleasure. You guys. So I will be checking in. Who knows? Maybe one day I'll pop in on one of your Zooms and see how you guys are doing. So you guys.
Thank you, Mr. Matt. Thank you, Mr. Matt.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.